Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 31, recorded February 14th, 2026. It's about where we will get our energy and what we will do to get it. So where we, the human race, will get our energy in, say, 100 years from now, what will be our sources, and what commitment, what sort of sacrifice we'll have to make in order to get the energy. This is a prepping channel. It's not your ordinary prepping channel, though. It's not about prepping for the next financial meltdown or the next war, though I think if you follow the advice that I'll give you, you will be better prepared for that sort of thing. It's more about preparing for a much larger change, a much more profound change that the human race is going through. For the last 250 years, we've been doubling our consumption of just about everything every 22 years. So each generation could expect, this is averaging across the whole world's population, each generation could expect to have twice as much as their parents per person. And this is coming to an end sometime around now. We'll get around to discussing where we are in that end, but it'll come sometime around now, give or take 30 years. And when that's ended, we'll no longer be doubling our consumption. We'll no longer be able to increase our consumption year on year as we have, and that'll mean revising all our notions of what success is. And then one additional issue will be that we won't have quite as much as we do today. Be more like the amount of energy that we had per person 30 or 40 years ago. It'll be, right now we have about 46,000 calories per person per day. Most of that is from coal, oil, and gas, and a little bit of that is from renewables, plus another 15,000 of food, fodder, and wood, so it all adds up to around 60,000 calories per person per day, averaged worldwide. And it looks like, actually, we've been the first 30 episodes of this channel have all been about discussing, or at least the last 20 episodes have been about discussing the different sources of energy and what they'll be able to give us long term. And so we can expect that first oil and then gas and then coal will hit their peaks. And then once they've all together peaked, the sum of them has peaked, then we'll start seeing decreases in the total energy available from coal, oil, and gas. And we should be able to expect at least two doublings, two halvings. It should divide by at least 4, and each halving, well, the doublings have been taking about 22 years, so we should expect the halvings to take around 25 years. So once the total supply starts to go down, we should expect that in around 50 years we'll have around a quarter of what we do now from coal, oil, and gas. Or the other alternative would be to delay this. We could delay it by deciding we're going to mine different kinds of coal that we haven't been willing to mine for the last 50 years, last 100 years, coal that requires us sending armies underground and would require a radical revision in our lifestyle. So one or the other, but so coal, oil, and gas will no longer give us what they are now. We could possibly increase them for another 20 years, but then the decline will come sooner and more abruptly. And then we've talked about renewables in depth, and we'll come back to them very shortly. So the main ones are wind, solar, and nuclear, and we concluded that they just require too much effort, too much expense, more resources than we can devote to them. So given what we can actually give of ourselves, our budgets, if we're not talking about printing imaginary money and then it turning into real money magically, then the most we could build would be about 15,000 calories per person per day of wind, solar, and nuclear, and any other renewable. So they won't supply the difference when coal, oil, and gas begin to decrease. So the last option that we have for getting more energy is food, fodder, and wood, our harvest from things growing today. Today we get about 15,000 calories. Could we possibly increase that? And we've spent the last 10 episodes, counting this one, starting with episode 22, on the land's harvest, how photosynthesis works, how plants work, and what we could do to improve that harvest. And this is the culminating episode. So just as we get into this, so this episode actually culminates not just the discussion of food, fodder, and wood and how we could get more energy from them, but actually it culminates, it's the last really energy-focused discussion of these. Actually, the whole first 30 episodes have been all about energy. We will still be discussing some more about why renewables give us so little in the next episodes, but we're coming to this is a summing up point, and we'll have one more summing up point a little later, maybe after 5 or 10 more episodes. But this is winding up the food, fodder, and wood, and in a way, it's winding up the whole energy discussion. So let me remind you as we get into this that the main upside for our energy sources, the main potential way of increasing our energy production is actually the world's forests and fields. And so that's why I've taken 10 episodes on it, and we'll wind that up to date. Okay, we'll talk about, and I've already told you, I think the upside is possibly a factor of 2 increase. And that goes along with some upside for the renewables, but not as much. And because the main upside is food, fodder, and wood, getting more energy from those, and because the coal, oil, and gas are going to give out fairly soon here, food, fodder, and wood, in other words, the production that we get from the land will come to have a decisive importance in the human race's affairs that it hasn't had for 100 or more years. So that's the background, just trying to frame where we are, and at the end of this episode I'll give you the first real prepping directive, the first piece of advice about what you would want to do to prep for the new era after exponential growth has ended and after we've come to rest at energy availability that's a bit less than we have today. So overall, the last episode was, I told you that perhaps a factor of 2 increase in our harvest from food, fodder, and wood from 15,000 to 30,000 calories per person per day. Perhaps that's possible, but on the other hand, the way we're going right now with the way we use the land, we are destroying the land, and we actually abandon a lot of land. We've abandoned more land than we are currently have in use for farmland and pasture land. And so we're actually on track to a reduced harvest right now. So the factor of 2 increase in our harvest would mean reversing the trend, and then first we'd have to stop doing these things that will eventually destroy our harvest, and then we'll have to somehow go beyond that and actually improve our harvest. But it seems to me that it's possible. And I discussed that in the last couple of episodes. The basic way that we would reverse the trend and actually do things to improve our harvest from the world's fields and pastures and forests would be by riding a pendulum. there's a pendulum in the way that we deal with the land, as sort of a trend, and I think it's come to its extreme, and we would look for ways to take it back away from that extreme, back in the other direction. We wouldn't go all the way in the other direction because there were reasons why we took the pendulum to this extreme, but we'll look for ways to maybe it's exaggerated. We've exaggerated the trend, and we don't need to do things in the way that we have taken things. So the extreme where we are now is that, and the pendulum is basically from big to small. Right now, at the present extreme, we do things really large. We have huge farms, and we treat the land like a factory floor. We use economies of scale. So you have the huge farm, you have the huge machines on the farm, you have the huge storage areas for holding the grain. You have standard practices so that are spread over very large areas. So you do that allows you to concentrate the thinking in some university or research institute or company, and that company who does the breeding, or or some government institution, and gives guidelines to huge areas of land. Farmers, thousands and hundreds of thousands of farmers are following the same practices. This is an economy of scale, and it's the extreme. I'll go on talking about the extreme we're at. We've really tried to take advantage of machines and technology and science. So the farms have become a world that's dominated by scientific and technological ideas. We have few workers who actually get their hands in the dirt. Okay, in general, a farmer on a modern farm will tend to do his work with machines wherever possible, and therefore, because you're always at a distance from the land, you're in some huge machine, or you're thinking from the perspective of what you could do with a machine the next time you ride it through your farmland. Because of this, there's little attention to the details of this particular land. You don't get to know each square meter and the differences between one square meter and the next, or between a field here and another field. In fact, they're all blended together into one field. You don't have separate fields 30 meters wide as you used to, and so you might have a farm that's a kilometer on a side, and you're treating it all essentially the same, whether it is the same or not. And the farmer's attention and the attention of everyone else involved with producing the grain, with using the farmer's products and supplying his needs, the attention is on business, it's on technology, and it's on machines. It's not on the land so much. Along with this bigness, there's an overproduction of calories. So we have we're producing something like 5 times more calories than we can eat, and most of that goes to cattle, and some of that is just thrown away, and we have a huge obesity problem worldwide because we're producing so many calories. I'm not saying all of these. This is a pendulum. This is a trend. I'm not trying to talk about cause and effect of which one caused which other thing in this long list that I'm giving you. I'm just describing where we've gone with this pendulum. And there's also been a trend towards processed food. So the food produced on the farm is treated as input to factories. Factories turn it into exotic treats, package it, and then you receive your packaged food at a grocery store or a convenience mart. And along with that, we've somehow reduced the price of food. Food, through most of human history, is a large fraction of a family budget, and could be more than a half of the family budget. And right now, food for most families, at least in the rich countries, is a much smaller fraction of the family budget. It might be a tenth. And so it's much cheaper than it usually has been historically. And that goes with that pendulum swing of taking advantage of economies of scale. But we saw in the last couple episodes that when you push these economies of scale and you don't pay attention to the land, its details and what's growing in it and how the water flows on it and so on, it progressively erodes. But also there are ways that you may get a lesser harvest. So first of all, you're destroying the land, so sooner or later you'll have to abandon it. But in the meantime, you might not be getting as good of a harvest as you could. So the way that I think that we could increase our harvest, first of all reverse the destruction and then increase our harvest, is to ride the pendulum backwards from big, where we are now, towards small. But we wouldn't go all the way. Okay, we can't go all the way. There are reasons why we took the pendulum this far in this direction. It was because we wanted, if you left the land just as it is and just came around and looked for food every once in a while or every day, you wouldn't get much out of it. Land that's left to itself doesn't give us much food, and that's why we decided to farm it, and that's why we've taken things in the direction that we have. It's a way of getting more out of the land, and I'm just not sure that I think we've gone a little bit, not a little bit, far too far. Okay, but we can't go back to where things were before humans began farming, because then we wouldn't get much food at all, and certainly not enough to feed us. So on the way back, we'll have to carefully explore what could actually do better for the land, and what could give us a good harvest at the same time, or even an improved harvest. And we'll have to do it by a trial and error basis, trying things on specific pieces of land, and seeing whether that improves something. If that doesn't, then you try another thing. And I discussed lots and lots of things in the last episode that we could do. Some of them I just mentioned briefly, and other ones I spent a little more time on. But so I'll mention a couple again. One thing is we could breed or do genetic engineering, perhaps, to create breeds that are adapted to specific land under specific circumstances. So it could have a more tailored approach to maybe even a breed for a specific farm or a specific neighborhood that gives you a good peaches that are in this particular land with this particular weather, and meets the needs of the people around it, the people who will be eating the peaches, and of the farmers, and so on. So you may be tailoring your breeds, not trying to make a breed that is good over expanses of 500 kilometers or whatever, but now perhaps for much smaller regions, and I think, or for specific climates, or even for particular events that may happen more often. Like in a particular area, droughts may come more often, and so it's more important in that area to have a breed that adapts well to a drought, to a mild drought. If it's not a mild drought, you just won't get a harvest no matter what breed you have. Okay. Or another thing you could do is try to help provide more water. Okay, and we talked about the possibilities of irrigating water from using water from our rivers and lakes and aquifers. But in the end, yes, maybe we will want to increase our irrigation. Certainly we'll want to increase our irrigation, but you know, but there isn't that much water available for irrigation compared to how it's certainly not enough to come anywhere near doubling our harvest. There might be enough to add 20% or 10% to our harvest of calories from the world's land, but not doubling it. But what you can do is that there's a lot of water, as I mentioned in the previous episode, that makes its way to the sea during seasons and events that we can't control, like rainy seasons and storms and so on. And in those cases, we're doing really well just to keep the water from going past our dikes and invading our cities and so on. So we can't hold that water and reroute it to farmland because there's just too much of it, and water is really heavy and really powerful. But there's another way to keep the water and to feed it to your land, which is to adapt the land itself. So you do small-scale earthwork. First of all, you look at I don't know, it could be 100 meters on a side piece of land, or it could be a couple hundred meters, and you look in that, or it could be your whole farm, a little bigger than that. You look at it and you see how the water is flowing across this land, and where it collects, and where it moves off the land. And often it moves through often there will be a valley, a system of valleys on your land, and it'll move to the deepest part of the valley and continue on down. But the goal would be to reroute the water so it stays on your land longer, and it moves, so it'll move in sort of a snake-like fashion across your land instead of going straight down the valley. It'll be held in ponds and it'll be absorbed by your land, and so your land will keep more of it in the soil and less of it off the land. And that way your land will have more water and there will be less flowing during the floods. So that would require a very detailed look at the layout of your land and actually altering your landscape to match, to retain water better. It would also, you would also be altering, you would be breaking your if you have a large field, you'd be breaking it into patches because there would be these water flow areas, and so those would be natural boundaries between the patches of land within your farm. And then you would plant different things depending on what the land is like underneath and how well it's holding water, where the water is being held, and so on. So you would be adapting yourself a lot to the lay of the land, but you'd also be changing the land, at least by reworking the water and flow and the species that are growing on top of it, and it wouldn't be so friendly to big tractors moving across in straight lines. You wouldn't have so many straight lines in a farm like that. So this is an example I've given two examples of taking the pendulum in a bit different direction towards smaller scale stuff, but you have to try it on this specific piece of land. First of all, you have to use good sense about whether this is likely to give you a better result for this particular land, and then you select between, I mentioned dozens of possibilities in the last episode. You have to choose between them and see, and then once you try one, you have to see whether it really works for you, and then try another, and hopefully you'll build up a suite of several techniques and things that help this particular piece of land give you more and endure better. Another thing you can do is I think we will continue using fertilizer, but where possible we'll use less. There are ways to build good soil that I discussed before, and to plant appropriate species that that give you good soil that actually supports the plant better and will give it more nutrients. Now, I don't think that will completely make up for completely allow you to completely avoid fertilizer on most fields, at least if you want a large harvest of grain from the field. But I think sometimes it might, and usually it may allow you to reduce the amount of fertilizer that you're using. And at any rate, you'll have better soil and you'll have healthier plants and better food, and also the soil won't be disappearing year on year. So I mentioned dozens of different things. Some of them I described in a little more detail, and some of them I just gave you a name. And they're all, you can go back to the previous episode if you want to hear that. But all in all, I think the trend is, for all of these things, is to give the land very intense attention and care, and then adjust to this specific piece of land that you're dealing with. And the adjustment could be on a 10 meter by 10 meter basis, or it could be a little larger, or in some cases it could be on a meter by meter basis, depending on how much care you want to give to this particular land. And then you look at it, you'll see what's growing there, you'll see how the water is flowing, you'll see the health of the soil itself, what kind of soil is it, and the weather and the climate and all the rest, and you'll adjust to that, and then you'll figure out what is the best thing. You're aiming for two goals, okay? One is to produce a better crop, and the other one is to help the organisms in that soil thrive and help the soil itself be healthy soil for your plants. So if you are building a wonderful ecosystem and not losing any soil to erosion, but your harvest drops, that's a deal breaker. You have to have a harvest. You have to have a good harvest from your land. On the other hand, if you are getting a good harvest, but the soil is continuing to erode and it's not in good health, that's also a deal breaker. You want both at once. Now, maybe you have to, certainly to farm at all, you'll have to make some sacrifice for the health of the land, of the soil. It certainly won't be as it was if you weren't there. Maybe you could actually make it healthier by feeding it, by making sure it gets more water or more nutrients or more fertilizer. But overall, it certainly will be altered. Okay, so there's a balance here between what you can do for the soil and the organisms in the soil, and the harvest that you'll get. And you need to keep a good harvest, and if possible improve the harvest while avoiding the erosion and stuff that's destroying our soil now, and actually trying to build better soil that has more water available to it. If we were able to capture the 7 tons that runs off in uncontrolled seasons, if we were able to capture some of those tons, that in itself could make a large difference in the amount of, so right now our cropland and our pasture land uses about 6 tons of water. So if we're able to get 3 tons more of water from our cropland and pasture land, whether by retaining the water better when it does rain, or by irrigation, that could maybe in itself give you a 50% increase in harvest. Overall, what I'm talking about is very judiciously pulling back from the pendulum swing, when we've taken everything as big as possible and pulling back to some point, but judiciously walking it back very carefully and very differently depending on which piece of land you're on. So why do I think you can get a factor of 2 here? Possibly. And this factor of 2 would take a long time to get. It would take a lot of work. I'll come to that. But the reason why is because the difference between the world's best land, the harvest that we get from the world's best land, and the world's average land, including the average overall deserts and barren lands, scrublands, and so on, the difference between that is a factor of 5. So if you could take ordinary land, average land, maybe not a desert, but just average land, and then you could probably move up, not at a factor of 5, but you could improve significantly. There's room for a factor of 2. That's the main reason why I think you could possibly get a factor of 2 here. You'll never get a factor of 5 improvement in our harvest from the world's land, because that would essentially be turning every square meter of the world's land, including the deserts, into absolutely perfect prime cropland, like the best that we have in the world today. It's just not going to happen. So and overall what I'm saying is that there's an upside here for our energy harvest, that we could get 30,000 calories per person per day, and it's a little better upside than there is from the renewables, and I think that the focus of our attention for getting energy will shift towards our land. Now the price of all this, though, of getting the better harvest, or even of keeping the harvest that we have now, the price of riding the pendulum back down from super huge farms powered by tech and by machines and so on, it is we'll have to give very close attention and to very small plots of land, and we'll have to really develop experience with each parcel of land to see how it's growing and how it's been growing and what has worked well over the last decades, and learn from that. This whole learning experience will take time, and the sort of practices that you'll need to do with the land to get the best harvest there'll be more work, more things to do with the land, more things to think about. There'll be more handwork, and because you won't be doing kilometers at a time of cropland, you'll be doing smaller parcels. There will be less economy of scale. So I'll refer you again to the previous episode for some of the handwork and some of the tasks that you would be getting into. But overall, farming land in a way that pays attention to the health of the land itself and doesn't treat it as a factory floor will just take more work, a lot more involved. So it's like the difference between making a special pastry and making a pancake. Pancake, you just mix the batter and you throw it in the frying pan and you get your pancake. And on the other hand, you make a special pastry, you might spend hours on that, preparing the dough, folding it, and so on. So we'll have to invest more in the land in order to notice what it's like, because we'll have to observe it, we'll have to adjust to it. We'll be interested in many species, because in order to have healthy soil and in order to feed your plants, you have to keep track of the species. You hope to have many species in the soil, building the soil and feeding the plants, protecting the plants, and you have to also, but not all species are beneficial, so you also have to, I'm talking about bacteria and worms and all the other things in the soil. So you'll also, and viruses, so you'll also have to somehow care about all the species that might hurt your harvest. And so it's all more difficult to manage because you're not teaching treating the land as a tabula rasa, as a blank slate. Instead, you're taking the land as it's given, and you're trying to take advantage. For each plot of land, you're trying to take the best advantage of that land as it is, with its particular good points and bad points, and you don't insist on it being something else, and you don't act as if it were something else. You don't take a kilometer squared of land and you treat it as if it were all the same. You look at the individual pieces of that land, and you see, okay, this, and you'll have to study the land to see which parts belong together. You might notice after you've studied the land that this particular corner of your field is different, and you can begin to sketch out what the boundaries are, and then you begin to think what should be grown on the different pieces of land and how healthy they are. You take the land as it is instead of enforcing your grid, saying I'll just make a square and I'll put everything and I'll plant it all in corn. To do this, first of all, at least in the human race's, the scientists' attention for the last 200 years has been on taking things bigger and how to grow species en masse and so on. And I think trying to pay more attention to actually something that's a lot more complicated, a living, growing piece of soil is more complicated than what we try to reduce it to when we till it and basically treat it as if it were dead. This will take a lot of trial and error, and it'll be slow. It'll be slow improvements, and we'll have to move with the rhythm of the land and accept that sometimes we'll make mistakes, and it'll take a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom and intuition as you gradually get to know this particular land. So it'll take years, it'll take generations even to learn about a particular piece of land and what suits it best and what is the best way to get a harvest from it. So it'll require a lot of whole lifetimes, but also generations upon generations, families passing on their knowledge from one generation to the next about their land and how to farm it. You don't, even if you go out and do some scientific lab work on your land, that still doesn't tell you. We don't really understand. There are millions of species that can come into play if you count all the bacteria and worms and things, but it might be only tens of thousands on a particular piece of. Still, that's an enormous amount. If you want them to somehow work together to make something, to make a better product, to make better land and better harvest, it's not something where you can go out and prescribe and say, we'll do this thing and it's sure to work. Instead, you just have to go humbly, try things, try to coax the land and see when it rewards you and when it punishes you. When it rewards you, you think, oh, I've got a good thing going, and then you try and then you try to keep that going and you try something else. And this will go on it'll take time. It'll take lots of time. So the overall factor of 2 that I'm talking about, I think, could come over a century, or more likely 2 centuries. It won't come in 20 years. We'd really have to give ourselves to it long term with commitment and individual commitment. Individuals on particular pieces of land who really learn their way, and families who really learn their way around that particular piece of land. Well, this would require radical changes to us, right, and to our cultures, especially because in the last 200, 300 years, our cultures have been founded on a universal effort. We're all trying to rise above the land, to get our hands out of the dirt. And we've been moving into cities, for those who do remain on the land, we ride around on the land in machinery with a big machine between us and the land. So this is there's a real status structure, and if you're too close to the land, you're low if you do too much handwork, your status is lower. If you do too much physical work at all, your status is lower. And so it's not just the centuries required to learn about the land to find a way forward with this particular piece of land. It's also the huge changes in our culture, as we'll have to reverse this status structure and this orientation of everybody running from the land as fast as they can, just piling up in the big high rises in our cities. So that's the price. Let's talk about the type and the extent of commitment that would be required. And I think I'll be repeating some of the things I've said. Maybe I've said them too early, but anyway, but certainly this isn't just repetition. Yeah, so I think that in order to double our harvest, we would need most of the world's people to go back to the land or into towns, small towns supporting the land. Right now, 50% of the world's population is in cities. We crossed that boundary in the last few years. Until then, it was less than 50%, but half the world's population is in cities, and half of it is outside of cities, on the land or in towns. And if you're in a small town in the midst of productive land, then in one way or another, probably your work and your existence are supporting the farms around you. So I think that to give the land the focused attention that it would require in order to give a better harvest, you'll get the more people you throw at the land, the more people give it close attention, those more people will know about the land, and you'll get a better harvest. So it'll be long-term work, lifetimes spent on a particular part of land, and the individual people and families would have to become very, very interested in the land, and they would have to work very intensely on it. You want to have a stable arrangement where it's not a family moving or a person moving from one piece of land to the next every year or every 10 years, because what you learn about a specific piece of land will not apply necessarily, and certainly won't apply 100% to another piece of land, even if it's a few kilometers away. So it's really, if we want to get this harvest, then the people involved with the land have to be all in, have to be committed and not hold back. The decision making about how to harvest, how to work the land, what to do with it, would need to be in the hands of the people working the land. In other words, at small scales. It's those people who will know the land, who will know each piece of, so you have a family working on a particular piece of land, that family will come to know that piece of land very well, and they'll be able to make the decisions about how to cultivate it in a way that will give the best harvest. If somebody else comes along and says, no, you should do it this way, that person doesn't know anything about that land, could maybe suggest something to that family or whoever actually knows the land, but the chances are that suggestion will be wrong because it's not adapted to the land itself. So that if in order to get the best harvest from our land, we'll need decision making about the land and about all the affairs on the land that's located at the lowest level. It'll be located in the hands, the power and the decision making will be located in the hands of the people working on the land. That's not to say that there can't be a power structure, a government, and so on above that. above these farmers. Okay, there will be, but that power structure will receive its power from the people at the bottom, because it will depend on them to produce the best harvest. If if they don't produce a good harvest, then the whole country falls apart. The power structure falls apart. So the power structure has to pay attention to and give precedence to the people who are responsible for bringing the harvest. So the people at I'm not saying anything specific about the form of government. I'm just saying that because everything, the whole society, for its energy, to get its energy, will depend on what's happening on the land, and it will depend on the people who are actually there on the land and their decisions. Because of that, the power will, in general, move from the bottom up, and what happens above that will be, in fact, what happens at the bottom will support any higher power structures, any elected officials, any kings or dukes or whatever, whoever's above them will be supported and determined by what's happening at the lowest level. So I don't want to. I'm afraid that in these last couple minutes that might have sounded a little bit political, but I don't think it's. I'm not really saying anything about the form of government there. I'm just saying that whatever the form of government it is, it has to allow the people on the land, which will be most people, to make their own decisions about managing their own land. And that will have consequences for the society as a whole. I'm not sure exactly how those consequences will play out, and it will probably depend. It will probably be different in different places and at different times. At any rate, I want to move on to something else. All this work, very intensive work on the land, will have very large effects on the land. Okay, because you'll have people who are very interested in helping the land, improving it, and getting the best harvest from it, and they'll be ready to, when necessary, reroute a stream, make a lake, or make 10 lakes, or improve the soil in one way or another if they think it will help. I'm not talking, when I'm talking about bringing the pendulum back, I'm not talking about reverting to the wild state of affairs. I think I already mentioned that. We're not trying to aim for, if we want to improve our harvest or even retain the harvest we have today, we're not aiming for a wild, letting our land revert to wild land. It's more like turning the land into a garden. The way that if you know people who have a garden in their backyard, and they'll have a bit planted here, they'll have something that they like planted here and another thing planted next to it, and they'll be adjusting to, and if they've done it well, then what they've planted will have adjusted to what's actually the land in their backyard. So I think, and they may have a variety, but it won't be huge expanses of corn in their backyard. They'll have many different plants, or it'll be fragmented in some way. Maybe not as fragmented as in somebody's garden where they have a rose right next to an iris, right next to a tomato. Okay, you'll have larger patches of land, but it won't be kilometer-long expanses of corn. So I think what we're talking about is moving more in the direction. It's just trying to think intuitively what this would be like. It would be a family knowing this piece of land so well, and knowing each square meter of the land, and turning it into something more like a garden than like a factory floor. There'll have to be greater societal support for the farmers to make this happen, and I think one key part of that will be higher food prices. In order to get people onto the land and to support them as they intervene in the land and work for a better harvest, and to support their families as they continue this for generations, you'll have to give them better than we do now, and that'll come down to higher food prices and to many other ways of supporting the farmers, people who are on the land. So I expect that that food in the coming decades and in the next century will come to occupy a much larger fraction of the family budget, and that once again, as it has been for almost all of history, wealth will mean having land. The wealthy people will be the ones who have land, or not even being wealthy, having any sort of economic wherewithal will involve having some piece of land. That's the way it usually has been, and I think we'll see a shift back to that being the way it is. So, and that'll be key for rewarding the people, and or just keeping them going at all, the people who work the land and bring its best harvest. I'm afraid I might have given the impression that I'm completely against machines. I'm not. There are ways to use machines on smaller scales, on smaller plots of land, and so when appropriate, use the machine. But I think we just won't be doing it as much, and it's certainly impossible to pay the same kind of attention to the land when you rely on machines than if you're doing more handwork. So if you want to get the best from the land, if you want to know it the best, you won't be overusing machines. Now let me tie these ideas into a couple of just let me mention that these ideas are related to some ideas that have been around for at least a century. The things I've been discussing so far, well, one of them is the notion of localism. So I'm not saying that this is identical to localism, or another word that people like is distributism, means more or less the same thing, localism or distributism. And that's one part of that agenda is to, when possible, to make things as local as possible, to do things on a small scale and to adapt to local situations rather than focusing on mass production and on standardizing things. So that's just one aspect of localism, but I think you should notice that that's a lot like what I've been saying. And another notion that people talk about and have done for at least a century is subsidiarity. Subsidiarity means that you put the decision making at as low a level as possible, and I'm saying you put it in the hands of the families who know the land, so that families, I mean like smallholders, I'm not saying that lords and nobility, but families, individual families, will be the building block of everything else. So I'm just mentioning these two keywords, localism or distributism, and then subsidiarity, so you'll know that there's a tie-in between what I'm saying and what many people have said before me. Let me discuss for a minute the amount of land that a family would be working on. Well, if you average over all kinds of land and you divide it equally between all of the human race's people, then each person would get a square that's 130 meters on a side. If you have a family, not just a nuclear family, but some aunts and uncles, or maybe an extra generation, grandparents, you have that family of 10, then those 10 people would have a square that's 400 meters on a side. So that's a kind of size that we might be thinking of for an individual family farm. Now, of course, if the land is rather fertile, very fertile, then that square per family would be smaller. Like on very fertile land, it might be 1 hectare, 100 meters on a side for one family, and the family would devote its time and its work to getting its best from that 100-meter square piece of land. On the other hand, if it's not very fertile, if it's scrubland, then you might have herdsmen or something, and a family might have I don't know, 10 kilometers on a side, I don't know, for their herds. It's just what the land will produce, the families will adjust to that, and the farm size will adjust to how well the land is producing. And of course, if a family is somehow getting better results than the family next to it, I think that it's natural that a family that gets unusually good results will get more land one way or another. Maybe they'll buy a bit of land from their neighbor or something like that. Of course, there will be some people who aren't directly working the land. They'll be in farms, they'll be in towns, or maybe in mines, doing things that are necessary to keep the whole social enterprise working. But most people will be there on the land. When you have say a piece of fertile land and and the family farm is 100 or 200 meters on a side, that means that people will come to have an intimate knowledge of every tree that grows to even 5 years old. Once a tree gets to a few meters high, everyone will know there'll only be a few hundred trees on that plot of land, and if you spend your life on that land working with these few hundred trees, you'll know each one. So you'll know your land really well. And why? Just to emphasize again why we would do this, it's because people and the societies made out of those people will have more energy available to them, and they'll be more able to sell and to share, to trade with each other, and therefore they'll have more power. Okay, if we do this sort of thing, then that society will have more energy, more trading power, and more power. Families that don't, well, they'll have poor and decreasing harvests, because right now the way that we farm destroys the land, and we'll have that society will have dwindling coal, oil, and gas, like the whole world, and they'll have a limited ability to build renewables, so they won't be able to supply like all of us. So they'll just be in a hard place. So let's talk a little bit about whether we should do this and the style in which we should do this. So I'm talking about really great interest in the land, great interest in getting the best harvest from it, and therefore a lot of intervention on very small scales into the land. So should we intervene in this way? Okay, should we really, should we go that step further of giving the land that much attention and that much care and rebuilding it when necessary? Should we intervene makes it sound like we shouldn't. Okay, we've already gone too far somehow. But the fact is we've already intervened. We've intervened all across the world's land. It's hard to find a piece of land that we haven't touched and altered, except for maybe in some desert or mountain. Okay, so we've already intervened, and why shouldn't we take responsibility for our actions? Why shouldn't we take responsibility for the things that we've already touched and altered and in many cases damaged? Why shouldn't we repair things or try to make them better if land has been? So I don't know. I don't think if you say should we intervene, it sounds like it's a bad thing, but it sounds like if you have something that you've already touched, damaged, and is suffering, shouldn't you intervene? Heal what you can, or at least make something good of it. make the best of it you can. And then there's another one, which is nature knows best. Nature does know best, yes. Maybe it does. But I think that when people say it, that's not really what they mean. Not really what people mean when they say nature knows best. What they really mean is that we can't do anything positive for the land. We have nothing to give to it. No way that there's no positive outcome. The best thing would be for us to just get out and let it do its own thing. We ourselves, personally, individually, and as a race, have nothing that we can add. That's what people often are trying to say when they say nature knows best, and I don't think so. First of all, I think behind that there's a hidden desire that it would be better if we weren't here at all. It's not even hidden. You see it so much expressed in so many forms in our culture, in songs and movies and philosophies, and so it's not even hidden, but sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, like when people say nature knows best. Where they talk about lowering your footprint, and when you say lowering your footprint, I don't have a problem with the damage that we do and the overconsumption. I'm great with reducing those things. I think we should, but don't. Why phrase it that way? It makes it sound like we would really like to vanish. Okay, it doesn't seem like it's about saying, okay, well, we should act with some degree of self-control that we have not been exhibiting for the last 250 years. That's not the message. It just says, let's go vanish. Okay, and then there's like often having another child or a country having more children than it might is seen as an attack on nature and a tragedy. So I don't think when we say nature knows best, that's really what we're talking about. We're just saying, let's disappear. So, but I think that if you pay attention to reality, to the real world, then you can say with certainty that human lives are a great good. Okay, humans are a great good. And we do a lot of evil, it's true, but you can't make a scorecard and subtract the evil from the good and see whether it comes out more evil on the evil side or on the good side. It doesn't work that way. There's a lot of evil and there's a lot of good, and they don't balance. You can't make a balance. What you can't say is we do evil, but we also do good like nothing else, and do goods of a sort that nothing else in the universe seems to do. We magnify and perfect the good in nature in a way that nothing else we can see does. So I don't think these sorts of arguments, like it's immoral to intervene more, I think they mask things. They don't forget to say they forget to say the real reasons why they're saying them. And the fact is, we have an opportunity to do good. We have an opportunity to do less evil, also, or to avoid certain evils. And we should take both opportunities, but that doesn't mean us vanishing. It does mean that we think carefully about the land and about what we can do for specific pieces of land to help it give a better harvest and grow better. So let me follow this up with discussing a few alternative attitudes towards nature, towards the world. And the three attitudes are that we could think of ourselves as lords or superior. Another one is to think of ourselves as stewards. And the third one is to think of ourselves as being in some sort of family relationship with the land and with the organisms on it. So, and I like the third one the best, and the first one the least. So the first one that I don't think is appropriate is that we treat the land as if we were its lords, and it and it's essentially our slave, or less than a slave. It's something with no, we can transform it as we like, we can manipulate it, we can buy it and sell it. It has no rights of its own, nothing, no, we can do whatever we like with it. We can destroy it if we wish, and we can eventually discard it whenever we like. It's below us, we don't need to pay attention to it, we just do what we like with it. It's not telling us anything, we don't need to pay, don't need to learn about what's growing in it, we don't need to learn anything about it. Okay, we're its lords. And I think often that's how, over the last centuries, that's how we've thought of the land and how we've treated it. A second way that we can treat the land is as sort of stewards. Like it's not exactly our property, but we have a responsibility for it. So stewards, cultivators, or gardeners. Okay, so we take responsibility for it, for how it's doing. We serve it, not in terms of it being our Lord, but we serve it in terms of trying to help it out in some way, and we try to bring the best out of it. Okay, that's a steward. I think that's an improvement over being a lord, but I have my suspicions about it, because a steward or a caretaker is a bit distant from the land, a bit too distant. So you have somebody, for instance, you have somebody working at a nursing home, and they're responsible for the people in the nursing home, and this nurse is doing the best she can, and really sometimes works overtime, and tries to know each person's name as she walks into the room, and does whatever she can to help that person out, help each person out. Sure, may be very professional, may be very well trained, but still her, or could be his heart, could be elsewhere, usually is elsewhere, in a different world. This person, they're doing the best, the steward of this nursing home is doing their best for their patients, but their heart is really at home or with certain friends, and their hopes and their passions are somewhere else. And that means that they won't be fully attentive to everything that's going on in the nursing home and to each person in the nursing home. They won't be fully personal. They may be very professional and doing a great job by any professional standards, but they won't be completely attentive, because there'll always be some other priorities in the back, and also they'll be ready to walk away when needed. Like when it's advantageous to find a job somewhere else or whatever, they'll walk away. Okay, so they'll be slow to, and if we do the same thing with the land, if we treat it as like something to be taken care of, but our priorities will still be somewhere else, and so we may not pay the best attention to the land. We may be slow to perceive it and its what it's like and what its needs are and its changes, and we won't be ready to lay lay ourselves on the line for the land. In other words, you need, in order to really learn from the land and to get the best from it, you have to spend decades and probably generations of a family's life on the land and trying to coax it. And just like if you're trying to bring up a cattle, you have to be ready any time of day to go out and help a sick cow or calf or anything. You have to be there for it, and if that means staying up all night with a sick calf, you do it. And the same thing with land. On the other hand, if you're a steward, you don't have that kind of devotion. So perhaps. So I think it's probably better to move away. I think stewardship is a great great way of thinking of the land, but it's probably better to think of it in more of a sense of a family relationship, a fraternity with the land. Now, we can't make the mistake of acting as if the land were equal to us. Um, you know, the land or the biosphere or the whole planet as a whole, or a particular area of land. We can't make the mistake of pretending that it can know us and speak of us the way that we know it. The land and the biosphere, they're not conscious in the way that we are, and they're not our equals in that sense. I think if you start trying to personify your farm or personify the globe, you're just in for a lot of confusion and a lot of trouble. But we could still treat it as like a family member, like maybe, of course, older, because the planet's, well, the biosphere is more than 1 billion years old, and we're latecomers, okay. But something more like a family, you can have a family member where one person or another just is unable to comprehend the things that most people do, is unable to talk or to get around, and, but it still can be a lovely family member and very important to the family. And I think that might be the way that we would treat the land. There are some things that it does extremely well, and in fact, it does. We live in a world of plenty because of the way the world is, and a world of beauty. But one thing it can't do is talk to us or make our decisions for us. It can inform us if we learn from it, but it can't tell us the way forward. So, and this would allow us to be more, if we think of it more as say an older sister, then we might be, an older sister who maybe will never be able to think for herself, but is still lovely. Then perhaps then we would be more quick to perceive and to adapt, and more willing to lay ourselves on the line for our farm and for our land. So those were my comments about the ethics and morality of this sort of. We should intervene. We should intervene in a way that does not do evil, but we should do it conscious that we can do great good, and conscious that one doesn't subtract from the other. You have to avoid the evil and do the good. You can't just vanish. Now I want to make one more point, just to follow up. It's on everything that I've said in this episode. We've talked about 3 options for obtaining energy. One was coal, oil, and gas. And the conclusion there was that that coal, oil, and gas will be harder to come by, and they'll require more work to get. We'll have to work for them. And we talked about renewables and nuclear, and in a way, again, the answer was we'll have to make sacrifices, and they won't be easy sacrifices. Once the sacrifice gets to being enough to supply 15,000 calories per person per day, my guess is that we'll feel like that's enough, and we'll decide we aren't willing to sacrifice anything more for more. And then lastly, food, fodder, and wood. Okay, and here again, the amount that we'll get of food, fodder, and wood, our harvest, will depend on the amount of work, the amount of attention that we're willing to give to the land. So for all of these energy sources, it'll depend on the amount of attention and the amount of work and the amount of sacrifice that we're willing to give in order to get some energy from any of these 3 sources. And that covers all of them. This is all of the ways that we could get energy, and all of them will come to a point where, in order to get more, we'll have to give more. So the amount of energy on offer will be, per person, the amount of energy that each person gets will be the amount of work done divided by the human race, divided by the number of consumers. So you see, you have a number of workers, they're doing some amount of work, and then meanwhile those same workers are consuming, and it'll be the balance between the work done and the consumption that will determine how much energy each person gets. That's different than the way things have been for the last 200 years, 250 years. Until for the last 250 years, we've been able to get energy very easily from the ground. And we've come to a point where you can send a big excavator into certain parts of Wyoming and other parts of the world, and that excavator can mine, operated by one person and with some supporting staff, can mine, enough energy that if it were food, it would be feeding 1 million people. Energy came very cheaply, and therefore we had a supply of energy, and we divided that by the number of consumers. So we had some supply, we divided by the number of consumers, and therefore if you increase the number of consumers, they get less energy because you're dividing it. So we talk about running out of energy. When we talk about running out of energy, it's as if we have some supply of energy, okay, and then we have to divide it among ourselves. When that supply gives out, then we run out of energy and everybody gets less. That's the idea. Okay, but what I'm saying is that we're moving into an era when it won't be some fixed supply that either it's there or it's not, okay? Instead, we're moving into an era where you do more work, you get more energy. You sacrifice more, you get more energy. That'll be true from coal, oil, and gas. You can sacrifice yourself more by going underground, okay? Working underground. It'll be true for renewables. In nuclear, you can sacrifice yourself more by doing all the work and everything required to build these things and maintain them. It'll be true for food, fodder, and wood. You can sacrifice yourself more by working more intensely and more carefully on your farm. Either way, it's more work, gives more energy. And that's because energy will no longer be more or less free the way it has been for a couple hundred years now. I mean, not exactly free, but so cheap that it was effectively free. And that's why we talk about the prospect of an energy shortage. It'll be the amount of energy on offer will be proportional to the amount of work and sacrifice that we make. So I think leisure time will still exist, okay, because we will have much larger amounts of energy than the average person did 300 years ago. We'll have, first of all, our farms produce more and I think they'll continue to produce more with what we know today, okay? And also there will be still different sources. We'll still be getting some energy from the ground. We'll still have some renewables to add to our energy supply. So we won't be living in the same conditions that people did 300 years ago before our multiplication started, okay? So we will have some leisure time and some flexibility and liberty, but there will be plenty of work for everybody, okay? I don't think there will no shortage of work, and if you're willing to get your hands dirty and work with the conditions in a particular place, with a particular piece of farmland or in the adjoining town supporting the farmers, you won't run out of work. There will be plenty of it for everyone. So overall, I'm saying the real question is whether we're willing to get our hands in the ground, get ourselves dirty, how much effort we're willing and how much sacrifice we're willing to give in order to get energy. That'll determine how much energy we get. So now I'm ready to make my first prepping directive for this whole series. We're in episode 31. Finally, I'm starting to give some prepping advice. Okay, and starting slowly, so the next piece will come later. But eventually I'll be giving a lot of prepping advice. Prepare yourself and your family for a world where much of our energy comes from the land. So give your attention and your time to some piece of land. It could be a couple meters on a side. It could be gardening it. You could putting flowers on it. But trying to make something grow on that land. Okay, it could be a larger tract, enough to to give you some vegetables. But give your time and your attention persistently to that land, and try to involve your family members in that. You work on it. Okay, and if possible, try to own some land and work that land too. That's my prepping advice. I think that will start to get yourself and your family in a frame of mind where you'll be more able to comprehend the possibilities that will be available to everyone over the next decades. I think that's a good way to invest your time, your heart, your energy, and your money, is in figuring out your way around a piece of land. Take it for what it's worth. But this is one of the most important things I have to say, one of the most important pieces of prepping advice I'll give, and I'll be going into the themes that I brought up in this episode again and again through the rest of this content in this channel. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a wonderful next week. This will be a week where we'll enter the next lunar year. So I wish you a new year, a good new year, full of good things, and I wish you a good week, and keep coming back. Thank you for your attention.